Morning all. All right, so for today's video, I figured I'd throw on a Victoria Royals jersey because why not? So some questions and questions that we will have answered during this coming season, which begins on Tuesday. And this was an idea I had, and I thought, well, I could come up with 10. I came up with more than 10. It ended up being more than 10, and that's why these ones are all squished together because I was like, I don't know how many I'm going to come up with. So, anyways, the reason this board started up was a very simple question I had in my mind about a week ago, which was, okay, so we've seen scoring increase, right? We had a 60 goal scorer this past season in the NHL. We had McDavid on a ridiculous rate of picking up points early in the year. Will scoring go up again this year? Are we going to see that increase again? Will we see it stay about the same? Will we see it drop? And I think part of the answer is going to come from which penalties are going to be called this year. I know that may sound like sarcasm or being cynical, but there's an honest question in that. I didn't see anything in the preseason. I didn't hear anything either about a penalty being called more than normal. Last year, of course, we saw the crackdown on cross-checks, which depends on which time of year you're looking at. One thing I did notice during the preseason, it feels like boarding's being called a little more consistently than last year. There were times last year that I think they were so busy looking for cross-checks they might have missed some boarding calls. But if they did cut back on the cross-checking calls, that would mean that defensemen in front of the net could get away with the cross-checks again, which was part of the game until last year, and that would cause scoring to go down. So really, which penalties get called could very well answer the question of whether or not scoring goes up again, stays the same, or actually ends up dropping. The reverse retro, and at this point, I've kind of just it's there. But I do wonder if the reveal's being put off by anything. It's odd because when the reveal came out for the reverse retros the first time around, it was before the season started, and it was kind of an exciting discussion point as we got ready for the following season. And this year, even though there's teams that I've seen reporting they're going to wear them 7 times this season, they still haven't revealed them. And I know that the release date, retail now, is looked at as being November. But what's interesting is that I got an email yesterday from the Hamilton Bulldogs letting me know that the pre-order I'd put in for the throwback to their NHL jerseys, which sold out last year really quickly, that those were being put back, that CCM let them know that they're not getting their jerseys. And it's not just those ones, it's any of them. So I looked at their store, and their online store currently has no adult jerseys. There's some youth ones in there. And it does make me wonder, so if there's a production issue affecting CCM, could it be affecting Adidas as well? And I only say that because if it's a materials issue, which we've seen over the last 2.5 years, if it's getting the materials to make said jerseys and getting them brought over and whatever else you need done, it may affect the others as well. But I have seen in the NHL shop, I've seen Fanatics versions of the new Sharks jerseys. So hopefully that means that all the reverse retros will be good. I get the feeling the stadium jerseys for the Carolina game this year against Washington, I think those were made a year ago, so I don't think that'll be affected. But yeah, I do wonder, like, is there a production issue we haven't heard about yet that could be affecting more than just CCM? And again, apparently it's not just Hamilton being affected, it's if you get the CCM jerseys. And then I checked the AHL store, and at this point there hasn't been a new AHL shipment that I've seen. Like, normally you'll see like all the new jerseys on their website, and Coachella Valley, I went to their website, couldn't find jerseys on their website currently either. And I know they did the pre-order, but it makes me wonder if CCM's not putting out jerseys for the CHL, could that affect the AHL as well? And again, I just wonder if we're going to see a problem with jersey production this year. Which I think is part of the reason why the reverse retro was such a limited run the first time around. I just don't think they had them. So we'll see. Question now, back to the hockey part on the ice. Will we see cup hangovers to start the season for Tampa Bay and Colorado? My guess is yes. And I say that not because of any reason other than teams that go all the way to the Stanley Cup final, go through all that, they have the shorter off season. It can be tough to get up for those games in October. It can be tough to find that when the games aren't as intense. You don't have that hatred for the opponent like you do during the playoffs. It's understandable to maybe have a tough start for that first 5 or 10 games. So we'll see whether or not those hangovers take place and if it affects their standing in the NHL. Who's going to tank the best? Who's going to tank the best in the NHL this year? My guess is Arizona. Now, I saw a post on the channel, but Arizona was supposed to be last year, and they weren't. Yeah, they were 2 points ahead of Montreal, so they were 31st out of 32 teams. They were still pretty bad. And in the offseason, they didn't really get significantly better unless there's a lot of rookies that come into this lineup and make a difference. But based on how their preseason ended and just in general, the expectations, I would say, are pretty low. My guess would be Arizona, but I could see Chicago being 32nd out of 32 teams. And I'm sure that if they won the draft lottery and Bedard's going to Chicago, I'm sure everybody would celebrate and congratulate the Hawks. That's exactly what would happen. And then what if the Leafs won the President's Trophy? So I think, was it on The Athletic? I've been reading so much lately. Where the projection was that Toronto would finish first in the NHL, which people scoffed at. But, I mean, it's possible. It's not like Toronto's been that far away from first in the league at times over the last few years. But, of course, we know the stigma that goes with the President's Trophy winning. The one thing is, and I've seen this elsewhere too, and I've been talking about this, we've seen teams that win President's Trophies, they don't win it that year, but they'll very often win it after, right? So you don't win it that year, but you'll win it after, maybe a year or two after that. So, I mean, it's kind of a catch-22, right? I'm sure Leafs fans would love to be first overall, but at the same time, it'd be like, hey, does this mean we lose in the playoffs? And usually, yes, President's Trophy winners, that's the case. And, of course, with what happened with the Jays yesterday, immediately I saw Leaf comparisons with the Blue Jays, and I thought, well, that's not very nice. They just lost the game. Just give it a little while, don't we? But hey, it's the internet. Not really. That's not how it works. And then for Ottawa fans, did the Senators win the offseason? Right now, most of us, myself included, would say yes. Ottawa won the offseason. But until those players are playing regular season games, we don't know how it's going to turn out. And then you've got the injury to Talbot, which means that the goaltending is a little bit shaky looking. I mean, Forsberg was pretty good last year, right? He should be pretty good again this year. But then you get into, so then the backup, when you need to give him a rest, and hopefully Talbot's 100% healthy when he comes back. All that fun stuff. But winning the offseason doesn't necessarily mean much for regular season, right? We saw that with New Jersey 3 years ago. I think it was 3 years ago. 4 years ago. When New Jersey, it looked like it won the offseason, and then their GM was fired shortly thereafter because they didn't win the offseason, right? Can McDavid reach 100 to 150 points? I think Connor McDavid can reach 150 points. Does he do it this year? There's a question that I think is tied to this one here, right? McDavid can produce at a 150-point pace. Absolutely. He can score at a 160-point pace because that's 2 points a game, or almost 2 points a game because 82-game season. But 150 is tough to get to because you're going to have downbeats during the year. You're going to have stretches of 5 or 10 games where you don't score quite as well. And for McDavid, not scoring quite as well would mean 11 points in his last 10 games. Well, then he'd need 139 points in the other 72, right? So that's where things get kind of tricky because every time he has a rough night, he's going to have to be that much better. And it just makes it remarkable looking at the records in the league with scoring and seeing that those just aren't going to fall ever, right? Question 2 related to scoring with Auston Matthews. Can he hit 60 again? Question I heard during the game the other night. I think it was Gord Miller that asked the question of, what is considered to be a good season for Matthews now after he has scored 60? What should his goal be? Should his goal be 65? Is his goal getting back to 60? I think his goal is getting back to 60. I think, though, that for Matthews at this point, they've had so many first-round losses. I wouldn't be surprised if his goal scoring drops a little bit because he's more concerned with the team game than with his own numbers. And I've talked about the maturity that some players have shown as they've gotten older and how it's been more about the team. Yzerman I've mentioned numerous times. I think we've seen that with Crosby too, where Crosby, as he's gotten older, and the individual stats are great, but it's more of what he does for the team than anything else. I think Sakic was like that too as he got older. So is that going to be something that happens with Matthews as well, where we see that scoring maybe drop a little bit, but then his teams are more successful in the playoffs? I think Toronto fans would take that trade-off any day. that Matthews at 45 goals and Toronto getting to a conference final or a cup final, they'd much prefer that to a 60-goal Matthews and being out the first round. Igor. So Igor Shesterkin, is he the best goaltender in the NHL? Last year, yes. Last year, it was just easy to say yes. Last season, it's Igor's season. It's his net. Absolutely. But is it Igor or Vasilevsky is a question that I've had. And I think this season is going to tell us whether Shesterkin now is the premier goaltender in the league or if Vasilevsky wrestles it back. And I don't really see anybody as being in that same realm, really. Like, it feels like those are the two guys, which is weird because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. I was talking about how we had so many really good goaltenders in the NHL, and it felt like we were witnessing a time where goaltending was really, really important. And now it feels like goaltending's kind of gone the other way, where you've got 5 or 10 goaltenders who can maybe turn around a series and win games on their own. And then you just have some other goaltenders who are just, they're good. They're, maybe very good, but they're not at that elite level. And so it feels like goaltending, now we have Igor and Vasi, I think, are the two best. And then from there, I think it's really open to interpretation. Goaltenders are very unpredictable. Goaltending stats are very unpredictable from one year to the next. And which teams hit worst by injuries? This is, of course, a really difficult one. Last year, Montreal, Vegas was hit pretty hard. Pittsburgh usually gets hit hard. And usually when Pittsburgh gets hit, it's key guys. Colorado, there was a lot. I remember St. Louis, is it last year and the year before? There's a lot of teams. Vancouver, I know in certain years we've had massive injuries to key guys. But which team's going to be the one that gets hit with it the worst this year, right? And it's unpredictable, but when it happens, there's two things that can happen. One, the team kind of falls apart on the ice, and then we go, yeah, that's understandable because they're missing these 4 key guys. Or they overcome it and they win a bunch of games, and we say, wow, that team's a contender because they've won without those players. And Colorado comes to mind, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, again, are examples of teams that have been able to overcome those injuries and win games when, on paper, they probably shouldn't have. But they've been able to use their work ethic and everything that they know from the systems they play to win more games than they probably should have. And then who will surprise by making or missing the playoffs? We all have our predictions. The channel's predictions, my predictions, very close to one another. And really, generally speaking, any publication you look at, and you look at predictions of who will or won't make the playoffs, they're all pretty close. They're all pretty close to one another, but there's always the surprise. As much as we can pull out all the analytics, as much as we can talk about last season and upcoming seasons and what the plan is, there's a team that just deviates from that plan and says, no, we're a playoff team, and they get there. Or the other way around, where it's one disaster after the next, and that team falls apart. So there's going to be some surprises. I would say surprises, I'm just going to say off the cuff here, Detroit making the playoffs, I think, would be a surprise. I don't know how much, but I think it's possible. I would also say that from the Atlantic, if Buffalo can get everything together early in the season, if that goaltending holds up, and with Comrie, with Anderson, with Luukkonen, we'll see. But if that all holds together, Buffalo could surprise some people. So while everybody talks about Ottawa, those teams are in the running as well. Then out west, I can't say Vancouver. I'm predicting Vancouver makes the playoffs. I have my fingers crossed on that one. And I really am believing that they're the team that they were under Bruce Boudreau after he took over. But if I had to pick a dark horse in the West, it's San Jose showed in the 2 games, I think, in the Global Series. There's a lot of work to be done there. And I mean, it's still possible that they turned around. Obviously, 2 games into an 82-game season. But a lot of it was similar to the storyline from their games last year. It feels like it's a very similar story they told in those first 2 games to one that we were telling a lot last year. If I had to go out west, it's tough for me to pick one out west that I think would be a huge surprise that would make the playoffs. So it would be, but Winnipeg. Sure, I'll go with Winnipeg. Why not go with Winnipeg? I don't know how much of a surprise it would be if Winnipeg made the playoffs, though. Does the league surpass $5.5 billion in revenues this year? So $5.3 billion was the estimate from last year, although it may end up being higher than that. It may end up being more. I don't know that the league necessarily tells us when it's more. I think they just tell us We think we made 5.3 billion, but then I was reading reports saying it's at least 5.3 billion. So if they pass 5.5 billion, the more money they make, the less money that the players then end up owing, and all the escrow stuff and everything else all kind of is a mess. But that $5.5 billion in revenue, if they get there, and they could, with all the extra ad revenue they're going to have coming in through the jersey ads, through the electronic ads on the boards, right? This could be a big year for them. And then in turn, it ends up being a big year for the salary cap a couple years down the road. Now, there's all this talk about whether or not we're headed into a huge recession, which could affect pro sports, but generally it hasn't. Like, generally recessions haven't hit pro sports. We haven't seen like a dramatic drop in salaries for players, but it may cause that cap, maybe the exuberant huge increase on the cap. Maybe it won't be quite so exuberant and won't be quite such a big jump when we see it happen, but I think the jump still happens anyways. Year 2 has to be better for the Kraken, right? It has to be. 60 points. They have to be better than a 60-point team, right? And again, this is one of those things where they could have injuries early in the season. They could get off to a slow start. It can end up being worse. I'm old enough to remember when San Jose had a pretty good first season, comparatively speaking, with expectations. They were like, hey, if these guys show some fight, who knows how year 2 could be. And they were horrible in year 2. So it can be unpredictable to, see how these expansion teams are going to work themselves out from one year to the next. Which coach or GM gets fired first? And, of course, there's going to be a lot of speculation. It really is going to be which team. And it comes back to here. Which surprise team ends up missing the playoffs? So whichever team gets off to a slow start and is below that playoff line, especially by about November 1st, that could lead to some changes. And there are some teams that are under a lot of pressure this year to make it and or may win the Stanley Cup. So the Stanley Cup winning pressure, those GMs and coaches will be, basically judged in the playoffs, although they may be out of a job if they're not going to be in the playoffs, right? So we'll see what happens there. But again, in response to these questions, you guys can let me know your answers in the comment section below. You can revisit it later. But remember, if you edit your comment after, it shows that you edited it, and people will know. Do cap problems mean fewer trades again? My answer to that would be yes. There's a lot of teams having cap problems. I really wish we had hockey trades back. Hockey trades used to be simple. It used to be a team had too many guys down the middle. Or they had a rookie coming in who looked really good. And they're like, wow, this guy's going to be a great first or second line right winger. We have too many right wingers. Do you know what we need? We need a guy on the blue line. So you look around the league and you call up a GM and you go, hey, I noticed that you guys have 8 NHL level defensemen. You got 5 guys who could be arguably top 4. How would you like a top 6 winger? We'd like to have a top 4 defenseman, and you work it out. And that's a hockey trade. And it didn't matter cap. There wasn't a cap problem, and it was easy, and there was always hockey trades were fun. And I miss those because there's always the cap side of it. I don't know that ever goes away. I don't know that the hockey trade ever comes back, but I miss it. I'm old. I miss hockey trades. I miss when it was just, you have this problem, I have this problem, we can solve each other's problems. Or at the very least, it might be, this guy needs to change the scenery, you have a guy who needs to change the scenery, why don't we exchange them and see if it makes things better? Which teams, so now we get into a couple of questions related to the channel. Which teams am I going to be biased for or against? I look forward to this. I've already seen comments here and there about apparent bias. I may have for or against certain teams in preseason. So, all right, bring it on. I'm excited to find out who I'm biased for or against this year, because it's always a surprise to me when I'm looking through the comments. Says, I could tell you clearly cheered for this team. What? And I've done videos for members and patrons, usually in the playoffs after the first round. I will do a video for members and patrons where I say, here's who I was actually cheering for in the first round. And it surprises people because I hide who I am or am not cheering for well enough that I sometimes think maybe I'm overly critical of a team I am rooting for in a series, because I'm like, I don't want people to know I'm rooting for them. And it's much the same during the regular season. I will cheer when things happen during games. I will also groan when things happen during games, like, oh, that's too bad. But then when I do the review, I know, okay, so I got to review everything that happened. And then in the comment section, I will see comments like, oh, you clearly weren't cheering for this team tonight. And I'm like, I cheered. And sometimes I'll leave that comment, but that's kind of, I'm always surprised by who I do or don't cheer for. And where's my check, Gary, is simple. So I have the Gary Bettman picture, which is a joke. It's there because I was accused of being on Gary Bettman's payroll when I've never had a check from Gary Bettman. It's never happened. I've never had a check from the National Hockey League. I've never been hired by the National Hockey League. And I'm not hired by the National Hockey League in any capacity. It's never, they've never reached out. There's never been anything. And I just, again, that's one of those things that I kind of get a chuckle out of. I remember when I started getting those accusations, it was when I was actually recording videos at not the first set I had, which was in the old apartment before I met Yvonne, but in the townhouse I lived in with Yvonne initially, where I was first filming in our bedroom, and then I was filming in just like a tiny little corner of the living room where I actually couldn't put my arms out because I would hit jerseys here and a bookshelf here. And I remember saying, if I'm getting paid by the NHL, I'm getting paid poorly because I don't have an actual real set. I have one now, but I'm still not being paid by the National Hockey League. So, come on, chop chop. I don't know why they'd pay me. I don't know why they would. The one good thing is, you guys know that because I'm not paid by Sportsnet, TSN, the NHL, or any media entity, it means I can report on whatever I feel like reporting on that any given day. I don't have any topics that I'm told, hey, don't talk about this, we don't want this, and well, corporate sponsors said. There's the YouTube side of it, of course. There's ad friendly, there's family friendly, and all this, and I've talked about that in other videos. But for me personally, I do like being independent. I think that it makes for a better experience for me. I think it makes for a better experience for the viewer. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.